Superintendent.
Thank you, Board President Noble, members of the board, our Public Information Officer, Mr. Cody Lunarski. Do we have any public forum?
Good evening, Board President, members of the Board, Superintendent Chavez. There is no one signed up for public forum comment tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Janarski. Is there anyone here who would like to address the board and didn't get a chance to sign up? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on to Roman numeral 4, our union update. Is there anyone here to do the union update tonight? Nope, and we did hear from President Grace Mayer of the NEA at our last meeting, which I think was last week. I don't even know. It was last week. Okay, thank you. All right, moving on to board announcements and follow-up. We start with the acknowledgement of our student board members who unfortunately are not able to be here with us tonight. Although I think student board member McGinnis may come at some point. But just to say, it's been an absolute delight to have board members Angus McGinnis and Aseneth Ultreras serve on the board this year. We've all experienced something special through their questions and their contributions. Mr. McGinnis, of course, kept us fully abreast of happenings at Santa Fe High School and doesn't cease to amaze us, whether it's serving as a student board member, as the Attorney General for the YMCA's New Mexico Youth and Government, placing in the top 3 at the New Mexico Highlands University Regional Science Fair in the Senior Computer Science category, receiving a Los Alamos summer internship in the Applied Genomics Department, or winning the Creativity and Innovation Award with his team at the Supercomputing Challenge, or being a master gardener. Mr. McGinnis is an amazing representative of Santa Fe High School, and in all he does encompasses what is meant by being a rising star. And we think we may have him back next year, correct? Yeah, okay. We get Mr. McGinnis to likely continue with us. Moving on to Ms. Ultreras. She's also been an incredible ambassador for her school, Capitol High School. She's touched us with her amazing heart and caring for others. As a rising star, she exemplifies the service and engagement, all that service and engagement imply through serving on the board, presenting to the Legislative Education Study Committee on her experiences during the pandemic, participating with the Community Educators Network to bring a teen portal into their website, being in the Santa Fe Chamber Music Festival's Dream Big program, playing in a mariachi band with the Santa Fe Youth Symphony, or supporting the work of Opportunity Santa Fe and the Santa Fe Public Schools, particularly, as we've heard here, to increase parent involvement and student volunteers in our school. We are in awe of all that Ms. Ultreras does and the love she brings to her efforts. We thank both of our student board members for all they've done on the board in their schools and for our youth in the community. So if we may just have a quick round of applause for our student board members. Okay, moving on, we have an audit committee update. I was not able to attend our most recent audit committee update, so Superintendent, I may ask you to fill in any details if there are, but one thing I do want to say to my fellow board members is we're missing one appointee, and I believe Vice President Garcia has asked if anybody has any ideas of folks to serve on the audit committee that he could appoint. We did not have a quorum, I understand. They still went through the agenda, but it does take 4 members to have a quorum because there are 7 voting members. Dr. Gonzalez and I are both voting members on that committee. So anything else you want to update us on from the audit committee, Superintendent?
Board President Noble, I think you covered it all. We really just talked about anything that didn't involve action. And one of those items was really looking for somebody to appoint in place of Mr. Garcia's in the vacancy.
And of course, and I want to thank you, Superintendent, and everybody who worked on the joint study session with the audit committee. I think that was quite valuable, and a number of us really appreciated the ability to go deep on the Audit Committee and Finance Committee, and the lines and overlap for both. The Community Review Committee update.
Yes, I would be glad to do that. So we had a really excellent return to in-person CRC meetings, which I thought was great. I got to meet Mr. Romero in person for the first time, which was fantastic. We got a great update on the Santa Fe High and ECO projects, you know, and particularly with regard to rising costs. I thought that was really interesting. And I think one thing that really stood out to me is that even as costs are rising, that the district will not be doing upgrades to facilities that are not to district standards. So the team is really dedicated to making sure that these buildings are up to standard, and I think that really stood out to me, that the staff is all working really hard on making sure that there are no corners cut and no students left behind in terms of the facilities. So thank you very much for communicating that to us. It was really fantastic.
Okay, thank you. Anything you want to add, Secretary Bose? No? Happy? All right. Any other board announcements and follow-up? Just to say, the superintendent and I just briefly discussed this board retreat we've been trying to get scheduled. Looks like June may be off the table. I think it's reasonably important, especially given the years we've just had, that we give everybody a break from board meetings, as was once the practice in the month of July. So we're going to look at early August for the board retreat and give us all, and particularly staff members, a moment to breathe over the summer from board meetings. But again, we do hope it can be not heavy on staffing, but easy on the rest of you, and a chance for all of us, of course, to be able to actually get together and talk. I think that's all on board announcements and follow-up. So we'll move on to superintendent announcements and follow-up. Mr. Chavez.
Thank you, Board President Noble, members of the board. My first update tonight's always the standing item, COVID update. Since May 2nd, we've seen 103 cases of COVID in our schools, and of those 103, 73 are among students. So we have seen an uptick of COVID, not only in our schools, but our community and around the state. 13% of those have been related to a previous case. You know, we're not through the pandemic yet, and I want to encourage everyone to continue to follow the COVID safety protocols we have in place, utilize all the supplies we have, such as hand sanitizers, masks, social distancing, being outside as much as possible. So we still want to really promote those safety protocols that we've had in place all school year. Our La Madera site is open and accepting symptomatic individuals for testing. Our testing contract does end June 30th, so we're hoping to hear from the Department of Health and the Public Education Department regarding surveillance testing for next year. I think that's the big question on all superintendents' minds next year. So what is it going to look like? We're investigating the cost to continue doing this on our own as well, because we have heard rumors that it will not be funded by the state. We're also looking into hosting shot clinics this summer for ages 5 through 11 who are now eligible. And we're looking at the impact from accepting home tests with assurances next year. And that's kind of the guidance we're receiving at this point from PED. Again, more to come. We'll continue to monitor this and update the board, the public, and our staff as we enter into the summer and return to next school year. My next one is our retirement dinner. We celebrated 31 Santa Fe Public School retirees on Tuesday night. Among our retirees, 16 teachers, 4 paraprofessionals, 3 secretaries, 1 office manager, 2 cafeteria workers, 2 custodians, 2 principals, and 1 counselor. They were given their best. They've given their best to our students, the district, and our community, and will be deeply missed. As you all know, summer programming was announced, and it's hopefully off and running with many individuals signing up for our programming. And one of those programs will be presented tonight as far as to our board, as far as what we're doing for our newcomers. So the listing of summer programs is posted on our website. We also expect to add more programs in the coming days that we're still meeting with community partners and they are now engaging as we announced what we were doing. The listing of 29 camps range from very popular math camp at Capitol High School to a summer art camp at Milagro Middle School, and even a multimedia production training and workshop with Little Globe. All Santa Fe programs are free to Santa Fe Public School students, so I think that's very important. Also, breakfast and lunch will be provided to the students. In developing these offerings, we're establishing a model for summer and after-school programming moving forward. So again, this is kind of our pilot year to really see what we need to do better and then provide a menu of options for our principals to choose from next school year. We do want to acknowledge 2 changes at the Public Education Department. 2 of the 3 deputy secretaries will be transitioning to new jobs and leaving the Public Education Department. Deputy Secretary Dr. Gwen Perea Warnament, who is Deputy Secretary of Teaching, Learning, and Assessment, has been named Director of the Legislative Education Study Committee. She's been with PED since her appointment in 2019. Katarina Sandoval, who is Deputy Secretary of Academic Engagement and Student Success, will join the City of Albuquerque as the Chief Operations Officer. She has also been with PED since her appointment in 2019. Both secretaries have provided critical leadership and support to districts and charter schools. They will be greatly missed. We wish them the very best of luck in their new roles and want to thank them for their collaboration with Santa Fe Public Schools. And that does conclude my superintendent's announcements.
Thank you very much. Any questions?
Yes, Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Chavez, can you speak briefly just on the status of air filtration in the schools?
Yeah, thank you, Board Secretary Bozay, members of the board. Our filtration system, HVAC system, box fans, HEPA filters, as you see in our boardroom tonight, are of high quality. We've passed every state test. We have met or exceeded the air quality that's required by the state. And in one of the bars, you will see that we did receive another grant to really address that moving forward. So we're in a great position as we finish the school year. We have just over a week left. And then, of course, we'll be doing that maintenance over the summer.
Madam President? Thank you, Madam President, members of the board, and Superintendent Chavez. You mentioned the encouragement to be outside as much as possible. Is that messaging that principals and teachers are receiving? And how have you seen that play out in the real world?
Yeah, great question, Board Member Anderson. We have provided that guidance to our principals. However, we've also provided guidance late last week, and we posted on social media a website that they can check the air quality. So that's the other important piece. We don't want them outside when the air quality is poor. So we did provide them guidance, some suggestions, and also that link that they can monitor their neighboring school communities daily. So that information's out there. Now, some school communities differ from others, and so the approach needs to be unique, and it needs to be based off of their school community.
Thank you very much. And Madam President, I had just one other comment. Thank you, Madam President, members of the board, and Superintendent Chavez. I just want to publicly, I've mentioned this to you personally, but I want to publicly applaud you and the staff for getting together the summer programming. It looks incredible. I had a parent ask me if adults were allowed to sign up. There's, this multimedia workshop, there's music, there's programming, there's STEM, there's just all kinds of really awesome things. So congratulations on doing that.
It was a great team effort. We had a team that put that together, so we want to say thank you. And of course, we said it's free to Santa Fe Public School students, but maybe we can charge the parents.
Okay,
Yeah.
I want to second that. I am so excited about the summer offerings. What you've put together is incredible, and the team and how our community has stepped up and figured out what we can do for enriching summer activities for Santa Fe Public School students, and I really hope that this just grows and grows. So with that, we'll go ahead and move on to our presentation, Newcomer Language Academy Summer Program. Superintendent.
Thank you, Board President Noble, members of the board. As previously mentioned, this is an exciting summer program that we assigned to the Language and Culture Department, and they took it on and developed in a short period of time what we're going to present tonight. This is funded by Santa Fe Public Schools. It is for our newcomers, and when we speak about newcomers, I'm sure the team will go into more detail. With us tonight is Lisa Vigil, Director of Language and Culture, Megan McCormick, English Language Coach, and Daniel Pastrana, our Elementary Bilingual Coach. So, Ms. Vigil.
Good evening, Board President Noble, members of the board, Superintendent Chavez. Thank you for having us here this evening. I'm going to introduce two of our staff in the Language and Culture Department. First, we have Megan McCormick, who is our District English Learner Coach. She has been in this position for 3 years. And we also have Daniel Pastrana, who is new to our district, coming from Oakland Unified Schools, working extensively with newcomers in the San Francisco, Oakland area. And so they're going to be presenting tonight on our Newcomer Language Academy, which will be a 3-week program this summer, and hopefully will continue for years to come. So, Megan. Sorry. Here you go. You're going to press right. Thank you.
Board President Noble, members of the board, Superintendent Chavez. We were invited here today to speak about the Newcomer Language Academy, which is a pilot program for our district this year. With your support, we're hoping that we would be able to continue this opportunity for future years as well. We want to welcome our newcomer families and children. We want them to feel welcomed and feel secure in our community, as well as gaining the skills needed to flourish. We will discuss the Newcomer Language Academy, but before we do that, we want to provide some overall context as to where the program fits in within our district, and then give some rationale behind the summer program. We'll begin with a definition of a newcomer student. We'll share some data on English learners in our district as well as newcomer students in our district, the Newcomer Task Force. We'll share some details around the Newcomer Summer Academy, some ongoing and future newcomer supports, and then some time at the end for question and answer.
Board President Noble, members of the board, Superintendent Chavez, thanks again for the opportunity to present. We're both honored and very excited to be here. Just to give some context, we wanted to share a definition for a newcomer student. This is taken from the California Department of Education, but it holds true for our context here in New Mexico. I'm going to read it out loud in a moment, but there's some phrases and words that we bolded, which I'll come back to in a moment. So a newcomer is an umbrella term for foreign-born students who have recently arrived in the United States. Newcomer students may include, but are not limited to, asylees, refugees, unaccompanied youth, undocumented youth, migratory students, and other immigrant children and youth identified by local educational agencies. Newcomer students come from many different countries and diverse cultural backgrounds. These students come to schools with various levels of educational experiences and speak a variety of languages, which may or may not include English. As newcomer students enter into a new education system, they may experience different academic, language, and social emotional challenges from those of U.S.-born students. So as you all can see, we've bolded various phrases from here, different countries, diverse cultural backgrounds, variety of languages, mainly because we want to highlight the assets that our newcomer students bring to our community and to our school system. We really see this as a valuable add to not just Santa Fe, but at Santa Fe Public Schools, and we want to be as prepared as possible to meet the unique needs of our newcomer students. So with that in mind, we wanted to give some background for demographics for newcomers, first at a state level and then zoom in a little bit as a district level. So let's take a look at a state level first. We have a graph here that illustrates the number of foreign-born immigrants who have come to New Mexico. This comes from the Migration Policy Institute, and you can see that our first data point is from 1990, where we had about 80,000 foreign-born immigrants coming to New Mexico. 10 years later, in 2000, this number increases to almost 150,000. And our most recent...
We know that many of the newcomer students who are joining our community are also learning English as an additional language. So I want to share some information about English learners in our district. Of the 11,530 students in grades K through 12, 3,500 of those students are multilingual language learners, so they're learning English as an additional language. We also have a significant population of students who are reclassified English learners, so they have shown English proficiency, but also have a home language that may be other than English, and are multilingual students. We wanted to highlight today 5 schools who have significant populations of English learners in their student populations. However, it's important to acknowledge also that there are English learners in all of our schools across the district. So schools that have significant populations are El Camino Real Academy, Capitol High School, Ramirez Thomas Elementary School, Cesar Chavez Elementary, and Sweeney Elementary. And of those schools with high numbers of students learning English as an additional language, many of those schools have a significant percentage of their total student body learning English as an additional language. So for example, El Camino Real has about 75% of their total student body as English learners. All right, so we're going to zoom in a bit and talk about newcomer students who also fall into that English learner category. We looked at students who are in their first through fourth year of school in the U.S., and we gather this data from parents on their registration form. For the current school year, we have 270 students who fit into this category. We wanted to see where are these students currently enrolled. And as you can see, there's a variety of schools here. Our newcomers are attending 25 of our 28 schools, so they're really all over the district. But you can see that some of the schools are welcoming a significant percentage of those newcomer students. So for example, Capitol High School has 21% of the newcomer students there.
Right, as Megan just mentioned, we do have newcomers practically at all of our school sites, and we see in this graph here illustrating that we have newcomers from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. We see significant spikes in 4th, 7th, and 10th grade, and that's just the way that the numbers rolled in this year, although it could change from year to year. And we did want to point out that it's often difficult to identify a newcomer in their initial years, kinder through 2nd grade, because many families answer the question, is this your first year in U.S. schools? And for a kindergarten student, quite often it is, but we don't know if they're coming from another country. So the data is a little bit skewed, but we definitely see an increase of students arriving in the later secondary years.
So as we saw in the general definition of newcomer students, we have a lot of variety and diversity of newcomer students coming to our school communities. About 80% of families are reporting Spanish as a home language, but we do have, many other languages represented as well. We wanted to highlight Dari, Pashto, and Uzbek, which are languages spoken in Afghanistan, as well as Tagalog, English, other languages, Russian, represented in as home languages of our newcomer students.
And finally, one last data point to look at is the country of origin of our newcomer students. Given that we just saw that 80% of our newcomers are speaking Spanish, it's no surprise to see Mexico and Guatemala being the two largest countries represented, along with other countries in Central America. But we do know that we have students from literally all over the world. Most recently, we were very fortunate to welcome families from Afghanistan and help them resettle as refugees. And you see a variety of other countries that we know will continue to grow as global trends in immigration show that this is definitely the case. So one of the things that we are really excited as a department to help organize this year is the creation of a newcomer task force. We wanted a systematic way of really organizing the different services and the cross-departmental efforts that are made to help serve our newcomer students. So on the right-hand side, you see 4 of our areas of work that we focused on this year. So the first one is newcomer monitoring. We wanted a way to be able to track where our newcomers are. What school sites are they at? What classrooms are they in? What grade levels are they in? So that we can best target services for students, families, and to support teachers in supporting their students. We would love to see this incorporated into PowerSchool. Right now, we're housing it in an internal spreadsheet that we've been updating. But again, that's something that we look forward to expanding and growing in the future. The second point is a big one, professional development and support and training for teachers. We know that when we build teachers' capacity, student experience increases as well. And so we were able to provide professional development for the teachers who are receiving students specifically from Afghanistan. And we also offered a 3-part professional development series for teachers who are working with newcomer students. This is something we want to grow and advertise and have more teachers participate in the future. We created a district-wide flowchart that details the different supports and highlights the different departments because there are so many teams working together to really help newcomers from the moment that they arrive and register to their placement in schools and, of course, their success as students. So we look forward to pushing that out in the new school year, especially as we have a new beginning. And then finally, of course, the creation of the task force itself. We're really excited because it features members of the Language and Culture Department, Curriculum and Instruction, CLSD, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, our Student Services, our Digital Learning, and we want to continue to grow that so that we can be as inclusive as possible in offering supports. So.
All right, so now we're happy to share some details about the Newcomer Language Academy, which came out of this work from the Newcomer Task Force, the initiatives for summer programming, and so we're very excited about this pilot program this year, and again, we hope that we can continue to offer this program in the future. So we have planned a 3-week program from July 11th to July 29th. It'll be housed at Milagro Middle School. It's open to students in their first through third year of arriving in the U.S. We really want to focus on developing academic skills as well as social emotional skills needs that are specific to newcomer students. We currently have 63 students enrolled, but we're hoping to grow that number before the end of the enrollment period, and we would love the board's support in promoting the program. We have interviewed and plan to hire 5 to 7 teachers and 2 EAs to staff the program.
All right, so we have many goals for this program. We have a lot of hopes for it. So first and foremost, we want to be able to provide a safe and welcoming space for students who have recently arrived, with the goal, of course, of building social and academic language. We have planned out for our 3 weeks a thematic unit that goes from past to present to future for the students so that they get to explore and share their own story, their journey to this country. The present, of course, their arrival here in Santa Fe, and their future, their hopes and dreams for being here. One of the things that we're excited to do is provide a weekly field trip outing on Fridays where students will get to get out and see the city of Santa Fe, get to know all the historic areas in town and the culture that we have here. And then finally, and certainly not least, is to build teacher capacity. As I mentioned before, we want to show teachers how to be both culturally and linguistically responsive in their instruction to meet the needs of all their students, including our newcomers.
And I would add also in that effort to build teacher capacity, we will have 2 professional development days for teachers before the program starts. And then on that early release Friday, we'll have some time for teachers to meet, debrief, and plan for the week ahead. So ongoing and future newcomer support. Of course, as we mentioned, we'd love to have this program, the summer program, continue on into future years. In addition to that, right now, our district is in a materials adoption cycle for grades K-8. English language arts and English language development materials are on the adoption committee. And so we're hoping that we can adopt some newcomer curricular materials specific to the needs of English language development for our newcomers. We're also evaluating the possibility of a newcomer specialist position. We'd like to provide ongoing district-wide professional development opportunities for teachers around supporting newcomers and English learners as they continue to be a significant population in our school communities. And we'd also like to continue the Newcomer Task Force, which would oversee all of these initiatives.
All right, with that, Board President Noble, members of the board, Superintendent Chavez, first and foremost, thank you for your time and attention. We wanted to open up the floor to answer any questions that may have arisen.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate the briefing. Questions?
Board President Noble.
Go ahead, Board Member Anderson.
Thank you, Board President Noble, members of the board, and Superintendent Chavez. I just have a few questions. This is amazing. I really love to see this. Do we, as a district or out in the greater community, support home languages other than Spanish?
Board Member Emerson, thank you. Great question, members of the board. So we do have world languages offered at the secondary level, and right now our main focus in the elementary level is Spanish with our dual language programming, heritage language programming as well. We would of course love to expand and see that grow, but given the large population of Spanish-speaking students, that's really driven the development of and need for instruction in Spanish.
Sure, absolutely.
And Board Member Anderson, members of the board, I would add to that our Native American Student Services Department often collaborates with the neighboring pueblos if there are students who are interested in getting credit for indigenous languages. Right now, that's something that's offered through the Pueblo. It's not something that we offer in Santa Fe Public Schools, but it's something that students could perhaps receive high school credit for classes taken outside of Santa Fe Public Schools, if that makes sense.
That's great. I don't know how you would support every home language of everyone who is coming. I just wondered particularly about languages that are indigenous to Central America, since we often have, folks in town who may not speak Spanish, but may speak an indigenous language. How do you handle someone coming in with a home language other than Spanish?
Board Member Anderson, members of the board, Superintendent Chavez, that's a huge question. So as Ms. Vigil mentioned when she introduced me, I used to live and work in Oakland, California, where we had a huge population of Guatemalan immigrants who spoke Mam, a third native language from Guatemala that neither resembles English nor Spanish. So definitely, and we see this all over the country and really all over the world. We cannot assume that if you come from a Spanish-speaking country that is your language that you are most comfortable and familiar with. So one of the things we want to do is just build cultural awareness and sensitivity in both our students and our teachers. What are ways that we can leverage the home language of a student to help them transfer and make connections into the language that they're learning? What are the ways that we can have them share their culture, their identity, so they feel seen, represented, heard, and proud of whom they are? As you mentioned, it is difficult to incorporate everyone, but how welcoming is it to see, for example, for a student from Afghanistan, a sign at the door that says welcome in their home language? That speaks volumes, and that's noticed, and that type of awareness and that type of naturally weaving in culture, identity, and language is what we hope to promote, not just through this program, but in general. So.
Great, thank you.
Board Member Anderson, members of the board, I wanted to add that we've been working closely with Raquel Plaza and Crystal Ibarra to do better in that area. I think that we need to get closer to the families, and I think we need to find people that can speak these languages and build a list so that we have a go-to place when we do invite parents into the schools, or when we are trying to welcome them, when we are trying to invite them to parent events, that we have some go-to people to interpret or to translate. And so we're trying to build that list with our family engagement department in the hopes that we can get closer to these families and then really take a good intake, have a conversation with them, because I feel that sometimes if we don't know the language, we tend to step back and we don't offer the same welcoming that we do with our English and with our Spanish students and with our families. So we want to do better in that area, and I think by finding these key people will help us to build in that capacity.
That's amazing, thank you so much. I just had a couple more questions, if you don't mind. Thank you. How exactly do you, and you may have touched on this, but how exactly do you identify folks who are coming in as newcomers, particularly those second and third year newcomers?
So I think Megan was mentioning earlier, Board Member Anderson, members of the board, that we currently use PowerSchool. We have a language usage survey that is completed at the beginning of registration by the family. It asks questions as like, does the student write in another language other than English? Does the student speak? And all those questions are taken into consideration. What's missing is whether or not the family has come from another country. And it's tricky. I mean, we can't ask the family about their immigration status or their citizenship, but we're trying to come up with some questions that we can ask. And so we're working on that right now to see how we can better track. Right now, we're using the family information if they do provide a prior school or a prior state, prior country, which is optional right now. We do use that information to determine whether or not a student is a newcomer. And then we continue to track year ones will then be year two next year, and so on and so on. So it's not completely accurate. I think we can do, again, better by trying to find the right way to ask the families the right questions and then to be able to track that in our system.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine that's particularly difficult for folks who are dealing with immigration and status challenges, for sure. Just one other question, and this might be a question for the superintendent. Hang on, where was it? This was a great presentation. I just have to find. Is it possible for us to see the district-wide flow chart that's detailing newcomer supports? think that would be fascinating. Is that?
Board Member Anderson, members of the board, Superintendent Chavez, I believe that it is on the website
cool.
under the Equity and Diversity Department.
Great.
I believe that it's there, but if it's not, I'm sure that we could
Okay.
get that for you. Yeah.
Cool, it just sounds so wonderful. Thank you so much, I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
One other quick question. How's hiring going?
Board President Noble, members of the board, Superintendent Chavez. Hiring has been a very successful process so far. We had many teachers, more teachers than we could hire, apply for the position. And so we were able to interview a percentage of our candidates, and we should be reaching out to candidates by the end of the month, depending on our registration to make final hiring decisions. But we've gotten some excellent candidates. It's been great to see really a lot of the talent in our district that we have as far as teachers that have experience working with newcomer students, and then teachers that don't have a lot of experience but who are very excited about learning more and being a part of the program to gain experience themselves. And a lot of the teachers have said, you know, even if I don't get hired to work in this program, I'm just really excited that we're doing it, and it's such a great idea.
Thank you. Secretary Boze.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Chavez. I have no questions. It was a beautiful presentation. Just want to say, like, how immensely proud and excited I feel at hearing this program is going to be happening this summer. Our schools are kind of the anchors of communities, and in the ability that I can to empathize with people who are new to this country, I think it's just so phenomenal to have programs like this and for them to feel welcome and safe and seen and heard, and for the message that sends to them, but also for the skills that it teaches to the other students. My son has 2 of the new Afghanistan students at his school, and he's just loved it. And I think, like, those are the real skills that we need our kids to learn, in addition to math and reading and writing. That empathy and that compassion and that excitement, the value for other cultures and other citizens of the world. So thank you guys, all of you, for doing this. It's incredible. And I do hope it continues. Thank you.
Superintendent.
Thank you, Board President Noble, members of the board. I do want to add, we're fully funding this, and what that means is we're not turning away any newcomers. As we've mentioned, we're trying to promote registration, and any newcomers that want to participate, there will be a seat for them.
Board President Noble, can I just make one other comment just to follow up on what Secretary Boze has said? I just want to say, just a plug for the public schools in general. There is no other place other than public schools that you will see this level of diversity and this level of support for newcomers. So like Secretary Boze was saying, outside of math and reading and science, this is such an important experience for everyone to have. And I hope that folks can see that this is a particular asset of Santa Fe Public Schools.
Hallelujah. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for your work. Best wishes for an incredibly successful summer. I think Secretary Boze said it very well. This is not just about the newcomers. It is about celebrating diversity and really learning to have a more diverse and inclusive world. And we hope that this program has gigantic ripple effects, as it seems like it will throughout our schools and our community. So thank you for your work. Thank you for bringing it to us, and really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, moving swiftly along, we have arrived at our action items, Roman numeral 8 on the agenda. We'll start with our consent agenda. Is there anything board members want to consider separately or ask questions about?
Board President Noble.
Go ahead, board member.
I just wanted to acknowledge on our contracts over $60,000, the contract for, hang on, let me pull it up. for the site work on the construction of the Santa Fe High Commons building. This is not a $75,000 contract that we're considering. It is a much larger contract, and I feel very confident after our CRC meetings that staff has done all due diligence in selecting Janes Corporation and in managing this project.
And just a note that that project is funded out of a general obligation bond, not out of the mill levy. Just a correction on our grid there. But I appreciate that context from the CRC, and it is very exciting that there's a new Santa Fe High Commons building coming. And I guess one question I have is, when do we expect that to be done? Given the world we live in, we know it's uncertain.
Board President, Board Member Superintendent Chavez, our estimated completion date is August 2023.
Thank you very much, Deputy Superintendent.
And Madam President,
Yes, go ahead.
just to follow up on what Board Member Anderson was referring to, this is also a project in which they are using the construction manager at risk to help manage costs. So this quote covers all of those construction costs, and there might be other things outside of the project that we will see budget adjustments for, but as I understand it, this accounts for any changes that might happen in the market. And so this is the cost for the work that's been outlined. Yay.
Yay. Additional context, much appreciated. Thank you. So with that, is there a motion?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
I will second.
Thank you, Board Member Anderson with the motion, Secretary Bozé with the second. Any further discussion? All those in favor of approving the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to action item B, Resolution 2021-2022-8, declaring fixed assets surplus. Superintendent.
Thank you, Board President Noble, members of the board. Walking us through this evening is Chief Information and Strategy Officer, Dr. Neil Weaver.
Good evening. Board President Noble, members of the board, Superintendent Chavez. What we have in front of us is approximately 3,800 retired technology devices, which are either broken, damaged, or old enough that they are not able to receive security updates and therefore are unable to be used in an educational setting any longer. It is our recommendation that we approve the disposal. Just for your knowledge, two things very quickly. The first is that anything that has a hard drive with information on it will be destroyed, and we'll get a certification that all of that data has been destroyed and the hard drives have been taken out. The second thing is that this is really our effort to catch up from during the COVID period. We didn't dispose of any devices, so we will likely see, I would say, 2 more of these lists over the next 4 to 6 months in an effort to catch up on the disposal process.
Thank you, Dr. Weaver. Any questions? What do we do with it all?
Yeah, good question. So it goes to Albuquerque Recycling, and as I indicated, anything that has a hard drive, they pull that out, they crush it, and they recycle it.
They take the metals and the valuable things.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'll go ahead and move approval of our resolution declaring fixed assets surplus.
I'll second.
Thank you, Board Member Anderson. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the resolution declaring fixed asset surplus say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much, Dr. Weaver. I guess you're staying for item C, Statewide Education Network Participation Memo. Superintendent?
Thank you, Board President Noble, members of the board. Again with us is Dr. Neil Weaver to walk us through the SEN, the Statewide Education Network.
Thank you again. Board President Noble, members of the board, Superintendent Chavez. What we have in front of us is the State Education Network, which is essentially put together by PSFA's Broadband Consortium. It's a consortium of 55 schools plus Santa Fe, so 56 in total. The first phase of this will include those 56 districts. The second phase, other school districts will be able to join in with the consortium. The consortium essentially provides two things. The first is it's a network of learning so that we can keep our network secure. We're going to learn from other school districts. There is professional development that is provided to districts and support, especially for smaller districts who don't have the type of staff that larger school districts in the state have. The second part to this is under the proposed costs with the SEN phase that you can see on the memo. What that is proposing to do is to negotiate with, there was an RFP that was put out for internet service for these 56 school districts. The essential thought process is that providing internet service to 56 school districts, there's more negotiating power, and we can hopefully get this at a cheaper price. When I say hopefully, right now we have a 5 gig service, and that is through, I'm sorry, I've forgotten the name. That is through our internet service provider, for which I have forgotten the name, I'm sorry. It is Plateau, thank you. It is Plateau. Conterra has won the bid for the new service. It will double our existing capacity for our internet, and the cost, the eventual cost, will not be more than we're paying now. So this is a win-win for us. The other great thing is that the state is coming in and negotiating with Conterra with a hopeful start date of November 1st of 2022. As you know, we can't move forward with a hopeful date to have internet. So we will have a period where we will still have Plateau in place, and we will start up with Conterra. It will be free until our current contract with Conterra ends, which will be July of 2023. Our recommendation is that we approve.
Thank you very much. Do we need a motion that does these 3 things in the memo?
To answer your question directly, President Noble, this is what was, yes, I believe it is.
Okay, well, just to cover our bases.
Yes, ma'am.
And Conterra is the entity that sort of built out this big backbone network here, right, that we've been working with?
That is correct. They built out our wide area network.
There we go.
That is correct.
Thank you. As I think Dr. Weaver knows, I love this. I love how we're building all the things that we always wanted in internet infrastructure with schools and education as the forefront. I think it's really exciting, and I really do think that everybody else will benefit as we get to more infrastructure and scale in the ground through public schools working together, and this does seem like a good way to do that.
Madam President,
Secretary Bozet?
thank you. Just to clarify, this is a contract for the district, like for internet in our schools, not for the other matters that we've discussed for students who attend and live in the city limits, that kind of thing, right?
Yes, Board Member Bozet, members of the board, Superintendent Chavez, you are correct. This is for the district's internet service. And to clarify, one other thing that I'd like to add is while this shows no additional cost to the district, there's 2 great benefits that we're getting from this. The first is that the SEN will file for E-rate on our behalf, which decreases our capacity needs. And the second thing is that while it does not represent additional cost, it does represent a significant doubling of our internet bandwidth. We went from 1 gig to 5 gigs about 3 years ago, and we are not using that to full capacity yet, but we see that as our educational needs change, so will our bandwidth needs, and we would rather be ahead of that curve than behind.
And to be clear, we are approving the memo and the 3 particular items. I'll go ahead and make a motion that we approve the continued participation of the Santa Fe Public Schools in the SEN Consortium by signing of the letter, and approve from Conterra 36-month agreement for the post-internet service, apportioned bandwidth monthly cost of $0.00 with the target start date of November 1, 2022. And 3, allow PSFA, the Public School Facility Authority, to apply for E-rate funding on behalf of the school district, Santa Fe Public Schools, for the eligible internet service.
I will second that.
Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Weaver, for the clarification on the E-rate applications. I know it's a great program, but those things are monsters, and that's great to get that time back. Any other questions or discussion? We have a motion and a second on approving the Statewide Educator Network Participation Memo. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, action item D. We are on approval of the 2022-2023 operating budget item on our agenda. This is the meaty item we have before us tonight, and we'll go ahead and dig in. Superintendent.
Thank you, Board President Noble, members of the board. With us tonight is Mr. Robert Martinez, our Chief Financial Officer, and also our Federal Programs Coordinator, Ms. Ryan Cooper. Mr. Martinez.
Thank you, Superintendent Chavez. President Noble, members of the board, Superintendent Chavez. Tonight we are bringing the operating budget for FY23 to you for approval. As Superintendent Chavez mentioned, he will also be participating in this presentation along with Ryan Cooper as we get to the Arp and the Sr3 funding. I forgot I'm in control. Okay.
And if I may, board members, have you had a chance to look through this presentation?
Yes.
Okay, given that we've all done that, I would suggest, if it's all right with you, that we take questions as they come on the slides, as we're all
Okay.
familiar with what's coming ahead.
Great. Feel free to interrupt at any time.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. So the overview is just the review of the proposed FY23 operational budget. I gave you all a good picture of that at the May 5th board meeting, but also the review of the proposed FY23 operating budget. Review of the proposed ARP Sr3 funding impacts later on in the presentation, and any board discussion and questions. The noteworthy impacts of the operational budget that we talked about at the last board meeting, just the adjustments made to address decline in student enrollment, decrease in generated units, meeting the mandated percentage and minimum increase for all employee work groups. That includes the $15 an hour minimums, the teacher level 1 through 3 minimums, and also the principal and assistant principal minimums. Also, staff receiving a 7% raise to their daily rate, at least a 7%. Some will receive more, but no one will receive less. Also includes board priorities. You'll see that throughout the presentation, some funded through operational and some through the ARP Sr3 funding. Improving estimated cash balance to 5.2%. Which is great news for me because that is back in alignment with Board of Education policy. I know when the board approved to go lower than the 5%, we really had no choice, and it's easier to take sometimes than it is to build back up. I think that just goes to show that we have been very thorough with our budgets, with our expenditures, and honestly our transparency with the plans and where we're going and where we intend to continue. Also, the ARP Sr3 funding utilized to address the operational budget shortfalls. As the board knows, you'll see this a few times throughout the presentation, but just that budget will be modified in the form of BARs, but budget adjustment requests after allocations are received by the PED. That happens throughout the year. We just received an allocation for FY22 a month ago. So our operating budget, just changes throughout the year. We've had a decline of 400 membership. We talked about that at the last meeting, which, affects our budget. It affects things that we're receiving. The FY23 operational budget balancing overview. This is just a slide that shows what our new deficits are and our other costs, non-recurring, against our sources of revenue and how we balance the budget. As I mentioned earlier in the previous slide, the minimums and the 7% increase. So the 7% increase to daily rate, 4.9 million, 15-hour minimum, 55,000, principal, assistant principal minimums, teacher level 1 to 3 minimums. The benefit increase to the employer and the ERB increase to the employer. A benefit increase to the employee, which was a board priority, and it has been for the last few years. And I think that's another thing to note, that employees are not just receiving a 7% increase to their daily rate because of the board picking that up and making it a priority of theirs. The employee actually sees a little bit more than just the 7%.
And Mr. Martinez, I just want to add to that point. As he spoke, 7%, but with the board priority, it adds another 0.5% on average on top of that. So we're a very fortunate district that is a board priority. So when we're providing these raises, you can add on top another 0.5%.
Correct. And I will say a lot of districts don't do that. I actually have a new employee who came from another district, and when we talked about it, she was like, what? They do that here? So it's great for employees to know what they're getting, because if the board did not make this a priority and absorb that cost, employees, although they would see an increase to their pay, would probably see a decrease in their paycheck if the board didn't do that. But getting back, the 3-tier teacher licensure movement, we talked at the May 5th board meeting that there's 83, 84 teachers that are interested in level advancement, and that's to budget for that, because as they move to the new salary schedule, it's about $10,000 per teacher. The other costs, non-recurring, the utilities are expected to increase to $370,000. So the total deficit and the other costs total is $8,249,000. Looking at our sources of revenue, the NMCA risk premium is estimated to go down $54,000. We definitely budget that. The absorbing vacant FTE right size adjustment, $1.2 million. The contracts, that's not a cut to contracts. What it is it's some contracts are no longer needed, maybe filtered out. Some might have been contractual service that was added to an FTE, so it doesn't need to be double budgeted. So it's just putting the funding where it needs to be and where it's appropriate. And then the additional revenue from the 910B5 SEG tool, $5.9 million, which balances our budget at the $8,249,000. I talked earlier in the presentation about bringing the cash balance to 5.2%. The estimated cash balance will be $6 million. And the FY23 initial unit value is $5,450.92. That's approximately a 12.09% increase. And I do want the board to know that the unit value is adjusted and finalized around February. In previous years, it has been adjusted more than once, but this fiscal year we saw an adjustment once, but that always is typical that comes. Hopefully it's an increase.
Board President Noble.
Go ahead, Board Member Anderson.
Thank you, Board President Noble, members of the board, and Superintendent Chavez. I know that SEG is like a very equitable way to fund education. I really love how that works. I'm just wondering how the unit value compares to other states in terms of spending per pupil.
Well, and that's a great question, Board Member Anderson, members of the board. We're one of the few states that actually has a tool, which we call the SEG, to generate funding for districts. So it's not uniform, and this isn't practice across every single state, but this is very unique to New Mexico. And I know other districts and states have been starting to examine how we're funded, and sometimes it's funded completely differently. So it's a hard question to ask because state funding is generated differently. And I do want to make sure that we note that whenever we see an increase to the unit value, which is an increase to our revenue, we still have to go back to the union and negotiate that increase.
Thank you very much.
Madam President.
Go ahead, Secretary Bozek.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent. I also just wanted to note again, or maybe Mr. Martinez can review for us, that the Family Income Index, and there was something else that was also rolled into the SEG this year.
Correct. So that will actually be on the next slide,
Okay.
where I will talk about that. Board Member Anderson, real quick before I move on, I just wanted to also let the board know, as you mentioned, the 910B5 is very thorough, and there's so many reporting elements that happen throughout the year, whether it's TCI, per pupil expenditure, so many things that take place throughout the fiscal year that are really drivers of how we're funded in future years. So I agree that it's great to have that, and it's great to see it broken up between whatever program it may be. So it makes me feel comfortable with the information I've been bringing to you tonight.
And Mr. Martinez, just for the record, it's 80th, the average of 80th and 120th day of current year for next school year. So if we see an increase or a decrease, it doesn't adjust on student enrollment.
Correct. So moving on to the review of the proposed operating budget for FY23. The operating budget, this is just a terminology because I know it's confusing to hear operating and operational, and it's easy to get the two confused. But the operating budget just describes the entire budget that includes all of the funds that the district has in operations and includes the following: operational, which is a main non-categorical fund of the district, funded mostly from the SEG, which now includes instructional materials and the Family Income Index. Those were ran through like a special revenue in previous years. They were to be included in the SEG moving forward.
And Mr. Martinez, I just want to add, this year the Family Income Index came to us in October or November. And so we decided to float the funding forward so we could start services when school began this previous year, this previous October. So now with it rolled in, we'll have that funding up front.
Board President Noble.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Board President Noble, members of the board, and Superintendent Chavez. When you say that the Family Income Index is rolled into the SEG, I'm maybe misunderstanding. So the Family Income Index only goes to particular schools, is that right? So then are the per pupil expenditures different at those schools than they are at other schools?
So you're absolutely correct. It is for 3 schools. It is for, correct me if I'm wrong, Nino Otero, Ortiz, and this year it is Salazar rather than Cesar Chavez. And so the expenditures will change, but the Family Income Index is specific for special functions, right? Enrichment, tutoring, after-school activities. So it's slightly different when you use that Family Income Index.
Thank you.
And there also have been times, Board Member Anderson, where something is included in SEG, and then later on we're given an additional allocation that runs through special revenue. So that is not out of the norm when that happens. So the operation.
Sorry, just to clarify, El Camino Real is one of the Family Income Index schools, if I'm not mistaken.
Thank you.
No, yep.
I asked, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're absolutely right. And I think they received the highest funding throughout the state, a little over $420,000. So they'll receive that again this upcoming school year. Good
Thank
catch.
you.
But the operational budget also includes other local revenues such as leases, rentals, E-rate, also includes cash balance. Special revenue fund is the transportation, student nutrition, federal, state, and local grants, city, county grants. Capital outlay includes bond, go bond, mill levy, which is HB 33 and SB 9. There's several SB 9 funds. Special legislative appropriations and the educational technology note. Debt service is the categorical funds that are used to pay the principal and interest of those bonds, and is also budgeted. Moving on to the special revenue budget, including, as I mentioned, transportation, student nutrition, federal, state, and local grants. The FY23 current special revenue that we have seen is $18.9 million. I will say that if you look down, FY22 special revenue, to date, we've received $64 million. And our projected special revenue, it's pending award allocations that increase revenue from state and federal awards. As I mentioned, the board approves those bars and it increases the operating budget. For these specific funds, because they are allocations and awards, we budget on actuals. We have to budget on actuals for these. We're hopeful, of course, that we receive awards. We know some of the awards, are being awarded, but the carryover hasn't been completed and initiated by the PED. So that's one of the things that's difficult. That there's a lot of we have about 50 grants and awards under our belt, and you'll see it on the next page, next slide, that several of them are still pending. And as I mentioned before, we barely received an award for 21st Century last month. So they just come in throughout the year and they continuously change our operating budget. I would imagine that our FY23 special revenue budget at the end of the day, after all the awards have come in, will be significantly flat to the 64 million, if not maybe $1 million more.
And Mr. Martinez, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, please.
One of the bars you approved tonight was an increased cost for fuel. And so that just shows that that goes into the current fiscal year and increases that budget as we move through the school year.
Board President Noble.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Board President Noble, members of the board, and Superintendent Chavez. Are these grants often recurring grants? Like, do you know when X grant will probably come in next year based on historic grants, or they're really all over the place?
Board Member Anderson, we hope to. There's times that we expect things to come in and then they don't, or there's times that we're not expecting something and it does. We do know what grants are recurring and which ones will be on the table and off the table. As I mentioned, we still have to get carryover awards for what is carrying over from current fiscal year to next. But we hope to know, but sometimes they're all over the place. It depends also what's happening on the federal side and trickling down to the PED as well, because they receive it in a different funding than we do, and then they have to move the money in their account before they get us the allocation, because they give us the fund and the revenue source when we do the bar.
Thank you.
Of course. So this slide is just for reference to show you all, there's 3 slides that show our special revenue funds, all the way from transportation, student nutrition, and on. You'll see that several of them say pending, so that's because we haven't received those. But a lot of the awards that we've received are significantly just around the same budget that they were previous year. We haven't taken a severe cut or increase to any of these as of yet. Arp Sr3 we know we're getting, but we haven't gotten the award for that either. So that just kind of goes to show that, we know we're getting that. We just can't technically budget it yet.
And that's a good point on slide 8. I can't tell if we're on that one or not.
7.
But slide 8 does show, we know it's going to be 20 million. We just haven't received that award yet.
So I'll just roll through these. As I mentioned, on this slide, only one we've received.
On the pre-K initiative, the 2.7 million there, and is that anticipated in that amount because of the number of slots we've applied for?
Board President Noble, members of the board, you are correct, and we've increased the number of slots for next year.
By how many, do you know?
I don't know, good question.
Okay.
Roughly 100.
Okay. Thank you.
Board President Noble.
Go ahead, Board Member Anderson.
Thank you, Board President Noble, members of the board, and Superintendent Chavez. Are there departments that receive grants through special revenue and then funding through the operational budget as well?
Board Member Anderson, yes, there are. And a lot of these grants that you see also hit the instructional side. They're not just for support, they're not for administration, they are actually a lot of them are for instruction. Some are even for transportation. If you look at 27405, that's a school bus camera allocation. But yeah, so they hit all across the board of the operating budget. Moving on to the capital outlay budget, this covers
Hang on. city-county grants with 5.8 FTEs this year. What are those? Is that crossing guards? Is that?
So, yeah, yes, it is. Is that Christiana Wagner said yes, it is.
It is.
I do know that those are, Sue O'Brien is the one who really has the majority of the city-county grants that we see. It's more like we work a lot with teen court with Santa Fe County and those kinds of things.
So crossing guards plus.
Correct.
Thank you.
And then moving on to capital outlay, this includes all of our funds that are budgeted in the 3, represent capital outlay, 31,100 Go Bond. You'll see an increase in funding from FY22 to FY23. It was because of cash balance. We recently had a Go Bond sale. We recently closed on those bonds and received that cash. There are no FTE budgeted out of Go Bond. It's not allowable. Fund 31,400, special capital outlay state. Those are pending also, like a special revenue. We have not received those. Our current budget for the FY22 was $392,000. All those are in activity and are expected to be closed, reimbursed, and finished by the fiscal year. Legislative appropriations have to happen within the same fiscal year or they're non-reimbursable. I will say that when I actually started the district, we had 30 projects, and between myself and the facility and maintenance department, we really cranked those out and getting them reimbursed. Sometimes the reversion date will happen sooner than we saw in COVID, that the PED was reverting some of those sooner. So we have really tried to get those underway and get them moving, get them finished, and get them reimbursed.
And we're expecting roughly the same amount for this upcoming fiscal year.
We've been doing a few questionnaires for, it's about 3 projects that we have potential funding for, but nothing set in stone yet, and that's still going through questionnaires. HB 33 is 14.6 for FY22, a little bit less for 14.1. That's because of cash position. There are 7 FTE budgeted out of mill levy, or sorry, out of HB 33, and that is, there's a statute that only so many FTE can be budgeted out of there. It has to be 5% of your expenditures, and it has to be relative to the actual funding and of what's going on in that fund. So it's like project managers, coordinators of projects. So that's what that is. That's why there's so little FTE coming out of there. 31,700 state match, that is on a reimbursable basis. The district.
If I can go back to HB 33 for
Sure.
a moment, what's the drop there of, you know, more than 400,000 from last year to FY23, or from this year to FY23?
We had more cash last year that we budgeted, and we used a lot more of the funding this year, so the cash position just changed. The audited cash changed.
I see.
Yeah, I mean, and we did fund a lot of things through HB 33 for COVID response and PPE, so we don't really exhaust those funds ever or spend down on those funds. As I mentioned, cash position carries in those funds, but in the last couple of years we have, so that's what that is.
And this is revenue that we're looking at on this slide.
Correct.
Okay. Board Member Anderson, did you have something on this?
I did. What is HB 33?
HB 33, that's House Bill 33,
Right.
correct?
I just looked up this year's, and it was the cigarette and tobacco tax, so I think I was looking at the wrong one.
Well, so mill, as I mentioned, mill levy before, it's a combination of HB 33 and SB 9, but it's a allocation. I mean, every school receives, as you saw ATC, when you approved their budget, they received like 200,000. Every school receives like a collection, a tax collection.
Thank you so much.
I really appreciate that question because that's something that catches me again and again. Who knows what year it was House Bill 33 or
Right.
Senate Bill 9, but we seem to talk about them that way, but they're the mill levy.
Thank you so much, Board President Noble. I thought I was being clever by looking up the bill number on NM Legis, but I was wrong. So thank you so much for clarifying.
There are a lot of funds in the district, and it gets confusing, because as you can see, 31,700, 01, and 03 are all SB 9. So we know now, I mean, we know where everything is going, but it's almost tough to communicate it. They can get easily mixed up. The SB9 state match, that's on an RFR reimbursable basis. We get an allocation. We have received an allocation every year. But we already spent ours for this current fiscal year, so we're waiting on any allocation that we'll receive for FY23. We haven't received that award yet. SB9 local, that's 13.6 for FY22, and you'll see 17.3, a significant increase there, but that's because of cash position. What happened was when I first started at the district, the chart of accounts only allowed, and I'm not going to bore you with this, but the chart of accounts only allowed very few things to be taken out of HB 33, so SB 9 was carrying the majority of the expenditures. Well, the public education department, and I'm sure with the legislature amended the chart of accounts and allowed for HB 33 and SB 9 to have comparable items within the salary schedule. So we were able to kind of balance out expenditures, take a lot of the burden off of SB 9, put some more expenditures towards HB 33 because HB 33 always had the larger balance. These funds are really towards maintenance of property, plant, equipment, construction. We also have some schools that utilize these. It's just on an ask basis. You know, Santa Fe High needed their pottery wheel looked at and fixed, funded it from mill levy. So that's kind of what it is. And but you'll see that increase in SB 9 local, and that's also because of cash position. It's because we put a lot more expenditures towards HB 33 and carried over more for SB 9. 31703 SB 9 state match cash, that is an allocation that we had to use 31700 before we could touch that, because we used 31700 and we already had it reimbursed. We already used the 31703. So that is gone and done. And we don't know if we'll receive an allocation for that. I don't expect to, but you never know. And the 31900 ETN fund, 19.9 budgeted in FY22 and 23.3 budgeted in FY23. Same thing with Go Bond, because of the cash carryover, because of those sales that just happened and occurred, it increased the budget for those funds.
So, in terms of how we spend capital outlay, there's a decent amount of it that is worked on in detail by the CRC and brought to the board for approval, including, of course, the general obligation bond. The ETN, we tend to approve those in the tranches, I think, as they come when we fund those bonds. What about the others? How is that budgeted and determined? I mean, we're talking between HB 33 and SB 9, obviously, close to $30 million at least.
So, and a lot of these run through facilities and maintenance, and are worked out in a plan with facilities and maintenance throughout the year. I know that we've funded shade structures out of mill levy, and it all is pursuant to the master plan, furniture for school sites. So, yeah, there's technology that uses mill levy for printers, for support throughout the schools. You know, I know a lot of the Chromebooks are purchased through ETN, but there is a lot of software servers that come through the mill levy budgets. The other ones the board does see in the form of a bar. Those are the pending ones. But really the HB 33 and the SB 9 is kind of just really in place for maintenance and for the upkeep of schools. And that's, we don't specifically budget it by site DAC. We budget it based on object code of whether it's construction, supply asset, fixed asset, other services, that kind of thing. And it's on an as-needed basis.
And it sounds like a decent amount of what's pictured here on this page, really maybe with the exception of the ETN line, is driven through the facilities master plan.
Correct.
Thank you.
I mean, the custodial contract comes out of mill levy. I believe SB 9, that is huge. That alone is over $5 million. So and that's why I talked about earlier, we had to balance out some expenditures because SB 9 carried a majority of it until the Public Education Department changed up the chart of accounts and allowed us to use HB 33 on there. We were kind of always almost overusing SB 9, really depleting SB 9 budget, and we had so much left in HB 33. So that actually happened last year, so we really balanced out our expenditures, but it's all a plan of working with technology, facilities and maintenance, and every expenditure that comes through them for their shop, you know, we work through and we budget through. There might be shortfalls with a project and that we have to fund it out of mill levy. As I mentioned, it's a lot of construction, whether it's carpeting, painting, I've seen electrical, paving, I've seen it all.
And I guess I'm sort of wondering, do we, I mean, some of that, like a custodial contract, we will have a budget or an estimate for that. And so I'm sort of wondering, what is the balance between what's budgeted of this revenue in sort of those things that we know, and how much of it is flexible as needed and on request?
Well, and President Noble, it's prior year expenditures that really drive the budgets for these, what comes out of capital outlay. I know working with Christy Onda Wagner's department, they know what's coming up and recurring, and that's what they open up those new fiscal year POs for, and we look at prior year expenditures, and that's what we know to open up those encumbrances for. So a lot of the budget for mill levy is honestly taken in the beginning of the year, because those are just recurring expenditures that, you know, we forecasted and that we expect and that we know it's going to be recurring services or recurring projects or whatnot.
With increased costs.
Correct.
Board President Noble.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Board President Noble, members of the board, and Superintendent Chavez. So something like, you mentioned the pottery wheel, how is that funded? You know, if it's something that like pops up like that, how does that get worked out in the budget?
Well, the sites know to call us, and I have, in my 4.5 years here, I've never turned a site or department away for mill levy use. It might be that we may need to wait between June and July until the new budget comes in. That has been my only time that I've ever put something off, but I've never denied it. So the sites know that it is an alternative to them. They know that a majority of it is really geared towards, like I said, maintenance and construction and whatnot. And a lot of them do see it in their schools. Like I said, whether it's flooring, whether it's outdoor classrooms, shade structures.
And that's what I was about
Music,
to, if you remember
yeah,
the
huge.
last CRC meeting, the pilot outdoor classrooms.
Yeah, I mean, music equipment, art equipment, that is huge. Music has one of the largest allocations in HB 33, athletics, correct? You know, whether it's uniforms, PE equipment for balls, whatever it may be, volleyball net, I've seen it all. But really, I mean, like I said, we don't budget per site for capital outlay for mill levy. If there's a need, they know they can come to us and we'll fund it. And we'll move the budget around as needed for that.
Board President Noble,
Keep going.
is there any concern ever that, say, one site might be more of an advocate for itself than another site, and the sort of equity issue that has, impact that has on students?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Board President. I'm sorry. Not yet. Yeah. Board Member Anderson, members of the board, there is, and that's what we really try to strive with our site supervisors, to really work with those principals individually to really look at what's maybe underfunded or what could be used as something that they need or want, programming. It could be that outdoor classroom that we just spoke of, the pottery reel. So it's really working on that relationship between site supervisors, Ms. Deputy Superintendent Wagner, Mr. Martinez, really trying to ensure that every site is listened to, their needs are listed, and we gather that as we move forward and see what we can fund and prioritize it, right? Because something may be more important to a site than another site.
Thank you.
And if I may, another place where HB 33 really comes into play too is, you know, the special capital outlay legislative appropriations are not always fully funded. So the district does have to absorb, and we can't take it out of operational. So we take that from the mill levy budgets. There might be times also where sites put in their asks for special legislative appropriations, and they were not funded by the legislature, but we do still consider them through mill levy. So it really just depends, but like I said, every site, I work with every site, and I get contacted a lot for needs, whether it might be a cart for the art going on at a certain school, or you name it. I've seen it all. So like I said, I've never turned one down. It may just be not right now. Maybe we need to wait like a couple of months or a couple of weeks. But honestly, I've only maybe done that maybe twice, just because we were in the middle of a fiscal year.
In summer projects, is a great way. I know Deputy Superintendent Wagner reaches out to the sites, and then they request what summer projects could look like on each individual site.
Correct. We okay to move forward? Good. Moving to debt service budget, Fund 41,000 and Fund 43,000. That's broken up between 5 lines: the county tax collection, the bond principal payment, the bond interest payment, other services, and debt service reserve. I don't expect anything to really change much. They might be a little bit more from our bond principal.
And just to be clear, these are expenditures,
Correct.
not revenues. Okay.
Correct. They will be expenditures, yes. So the bond principal and interest payments, those increase very slightly. Other services, you'll see there wasn't budget last year, but there was expenditures, so we actually did a bar for that already. So I know those expenditures are forthcoming, so I already included it in the budget, so we don't have to do the bar next year. The county tax collection budgeted just a little bit more, because that always seems to increase a little bit throughout every fiscal year. The total, and then the debt service reserve, 37 million last year, 43 this year, 43, almost 0.5 this year.
What is the county tax collection?
That is, so we have to pay the county tax collection. They automatically take it out of what we receive through debt service. So we just have to make sure that we allocate for that expenditure and hit it on the general ledger.
Thank you.
But as I mentioned, debt service is a categorical fund that is just used to pay interest and principal. That happens, those payments happen twice throughout the fiscal year. One is principal and interest, and then the other one is just interest. ETN is on a much smaller schedule to pay back. It's about 3 years. I think the most I've ever seen is 4. Go bond is much lengthier. It's about 8 to 10 years. And that just is the schedule of how we're going to pay off that debt and how soon we're going to pay off that debt. The operational budget roll-up. This is our budget. The subtotal for the instruction functions is 75.5 million, and as I mentioned, this is just the operational. So this is the 115 that we're bringing in through the SEG for FY23. Instruction functions, and I'll break down the functions on the next slide, are 75.5 million. Support service functions, 39.5 million. Operation of non-instructional functions, you'll see that's very minimal. That's noon duty. And then the Board of Education agreement to cover employee health insurance increased costs, the board initiative at 440,000. And this is the operational budget by function. So it's broken up between the instruction functions that include salaries, benefits, if there's any services, supplies, other expenses. So you'll just see them broken up by function for instruction, support, non-instruction, and then the total operational fund budget. Instruction, the subtotal of instruction functions is 65% of the operational budget. The support is 34%, and the operation of non-instructional is 1%. I will say that the support service functions does include some instructional function, but they have to be budgeted there, and that's where we put them. But
Board President Noble.
Go ahead, Board Member Anderson.
Thank you, Board President Noble, members of the board, and Superintendent Chavez. When you say that there are instructional pieces included in the support, budget. What does that mean?
Well, there's
Sorry, I feel like that's a silly question, but.
No, not at all. Board Member Anderson, it's just that it includes administration and support staff. And that's what the support services includes. There are support staff that actually do take part in administration, or in instruction. There are administrative staff that also do take part in instruction. They have to be budgeted based on their job description and their title and whatnot under support, because they technically don't align under the 1000 function of instruction. But it doesn't necessarily say that they don't provide any instruction. It may not be that their whole entire job, 100% of what they're doing, caters and provides to instruction. It might be only that 25% of their job or 50% of their job is instruction-based, but they are budgeted out of support and administration.
Thank you.
And all that, if I can add, is reported to PED, and that's how that's generated through the SEG. So when we report our information, my license is reported under a specific function, and that's how we're also, everybody in this room is funded.
Okay, great. Board President Noble. Thank you, Board President Noble, members of the board, and Superintendent Chavez. This is kind of a two-part question. What's the difference in supplies under support and under instructional? And can you break down what those supplies might be, just some examples of what's rolled into that?
Sure. Board Member Anderson, supplies that are in instructional are directly related to the classroom. It could be, I don't know, instructional materials, books, that kind of thing. My knowledge is more on the supplies.
Directly
Sure, yeah, I
related to
understand.
classroom instruction.
Right.
Right, yeah.
So, and then the supplies of support might be office equipment. Or one thing that I will say for this year, FY23's budget, is we're taking out the custodial supplies. So that would be admin and support. But we're taking out the custodial supply budgets out of operational, and we're funding them through mill levy. That's something that the sites won't have to budget. It's something that they won't have to deal with or work with. It's going to be a specific just work between facilities and maintenance and business services. That way we ensure
streamline the
they're
process.
adequately funded and they have everything they need.
It should streamline the process. They don't have to worry about ordering paper towels, toilet paper, soap. And so we're going to take that responsibility off of their plate, and we'll add it to the contract.
Okay, great.
Any other questions before I move forward on this roll-up?
Not for me, thank you.
Okay. The operating budget roll-up, so this is going to include the operational and include just the capital outlay, debt service, and that 18.9 that we saw in special revenue. The subtotal instruction functions for the operating is 89.3, support service functions 43.8, the operation of non-instructional functions 910. Capital outlay function budget, as we saw, was 80 million. The debt service functions at 86.4 million, and also throwing in the board agreement to cover the employee health insurance increase costs at 440,000, brings the total operating budget for FY23 that I am asking you to approve tonight to 301,165,713. I also, on the next slide, have it broken up by function. So the operating budget roll-up is a little bit lengthier, so I have it broken up between two slides. But the subtotal instruction functions, 89.3. Once again, you'll just see the salaries, the benefits, any professional services, supplies, property. The support service function, same thing, the salaries, benefits, services, supplies, property, other expenses.
Mr. Martinez, I just want to add, when we're talking about FTEs on an average, we're talking about $101,000 per FTE in the classroom. That includes salaries and benefits.
Could be more, and that's for a teacher. That's the average teacher by the 55.6% in benefits. But that's on average. That's could be more, could be less, but that's the average. And moving on to the other page of the operating budget roll-up, just the bottom part, the operation of non-instruction functions. Like I said, that includes noon duty, non-instructional compensation, very minimal. And then the salaries for capital outlay, you'll see it's very small, 475,000. As I mentioned, that's that 7 FTE coming out of HB 33. The employee benefits, you'll see the professional services and the property services and the other purchase services, the supplies, the property. It's a lot more budgeted in here because those are broken up between the functions of construction, other services, maintenance and repair, and bringing the capital outlay functions, as I mentioned, to 80 million, 80.1, debt service function 86.4, bringing the total operating budget to 301 million, a little over 301.
Board President Noble.
Go ahead, Board Member Anderson.
Thank you, Board President Noble, members of the board, and Superintendent Chavez. Why are the same things budgeted in two different places?
Board Member Anderson, can you give me an
Or-
example?
Yeah, absolutely. So it looks like we're looking at similar things, right? Instructional and support. But I see them in both the operational budget and the operating budget, and I'm just a little confused about how like the salaries are budgeted in both the operating budget and the operational budget.
Board Member Anderson, so the operational budget is included in the operating. They're not double budgeted. It's the operational budget that you saw rolled into the operating budget. So we have the operational budget in its own bucket, capital outlay in its own bucket, debt service in its own bucket, and in the operating budget roll-up that you're seeing, it's just all thrown into one.
Okay.
So-
So why are they different amounts then?
Well, because they increased, because there's some of that special revenue that we've received that we've already put into play in budget,
Okay, thank you so much.
of course. Moving on to the total operating budget, this shows just the funding sources, operational, special revenue, capital outlay, debt service, and our total operating. So our total operating budget for FY22 is currently $326.6 million. I don't expect that to change, and I really hope it doesn't this late in the game, but you never know. The FY23 budget, as you saw on the last slide, $301.1 million. The FY22 chart that you see right there paints a pretty good picture of what the funding sources are and really how they come into play in the whole entire operating budget. And you'll see the chart below FY23, like special revenue, we haven't really received much, but as the year goes on, that chart fluctuates with what the funding is and how big of a role it plays, you know, in the district. Every piece of funding plays a major role, but it just goes to show how each one is in the operating budget.
Madam President.
Go ahead, Secretary Bouzet.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent. So just to follow up on Board Member Anderson's question about the numbers looking different, I'm looking at slide 11 and slide 14, where you have your roll-ups. Because those line items are the same, but the total is different, and you're saying that's because there are different funding sources?
So 11 is, Secretary Bouzet, 11 is debt service, and the FY23 budget for debt service is $86,476,390.81.
No, sorry, 12 and 14, just your two, the operational budget roll-up and the operating budget roll-up have the same line items with different projected budgeted
Right, it's
amounts.
because what you saw on slide 12 is just the operational, and as I mentioned, the 18.9 for special revenue
Includes other.
includes
Okay.
on the operating for slide 14.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to clarify.
Yep, of course. So just moving back to this slide, this is just everything we covered, what we received in FY22 and what we are projecting or what we already have received for FY23. Santa Fe Public Schools budgets based on actuals. As mentioned before, special revenue increases when Santa Fe Public Schools receives award allocations, and that doesn't necessarily just go for special revenue, it goes for capital outlay as well, because those SB 9 state matches and the legislative appropriations will change as well. I would imagine that the budget for FY23 is going to be well beyond 326 million. I would imagine it to be at least 340 million. And I will go ahead and hand it over to Ryan Cooper to go through Arp and Sr3.
Hello, Board President Noble and members of the board, Superintendent Chavez. I'll just go through the summary of the Arp and Sr3 plans. So it's up there, and this is broken down by board priority, and there's a couple extra categories that are covered by ESSER but not board priorities. So the first is employee increase in benefits. So 1.5 million is set aside for, well, some of this has been spent because it started in FY22. So retention stipends, and then the launch of the staff child care program. Then the next priority is engagement in partnering with our community. So some of the expenses in there will be social media, volunteers, translation, community engagement staff, including attendance coaches, and then partnerships with community partners to provide college and career, social emotional learning and enrichment programs. And then the next section, which is the bulk of the funds, is for enhancement of teaching and learning to further equity. And what goes in there is a whole bunch of instructional support. So things like summer programs, standards-based grading implementation, enhanced services for underrepresented students, and also teacher certification programs that'll increase teacher capacity. Okay. On the next slide is Reimagining SFPS. So 3.3 million has been set aside to launch the CCTE program in Desert Sage Academy. And then also almost $1 million to support the HR department, $550,000 for social emotional programs. And I should also add that in the 11.2 million was about 3 million that goes to sites. So additional funds for social, emotional, and mental health programs are planned at the site level. Also planned is 1.2 million for COVID response and physical health, and then 600,000 for indirect to help keep the lights on. And that's pretty much it for ESSER. Any questions?
Madam President, I have a question.
Go ahead, Secretary Bose.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent. Under the Reimagining SFPS line item, that contract for alignment, collaboration, prioritization, and marketing for Reimagining, is that something that's upcoming? Or is that something that's in progress already?
In progress.
Okay, thank you.
Well, upcoming.
Okay,
We're-
it's not a contract that we
Not-
have existing?
not
Okay, I
currently.
was thinking I didn't recall that.
No,
and
no.
I was pretty sure I would remember that. Cool, thank you.
We won't let that one fly by without you noticing. And I'm trying to keep the plot here. So we've already approved the Arp and Sr3 budget, right? So what we would approve tonight, what we're looking at is the operational and the operating budget primarily.
Correct.
The Arp Sr3 budget is so that we understand how that complements.
And where the board priorities fall.
Yeah.
And just to add, as we mentioned, I think during our study session, the Arp Sr3 application can be edited and amended at any time. And we work with PED, so we can always have a little more flexibility with this type of funding.
But that's an affirmative. We have approved this budget. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, and then just moving on to the upcoming dates and process, very few bullet points here, but submit the budget to the Public Education Department. The deadline is June 1st, 2022 at 8 a.m. sharp. Our goal is to obviously have it before then. Mentioned before, budget adjustment request bars to address impacts to funding throughout the fiscal year. Budget is built by balancing revenues and expenditures. And with that, I will stand for any other questions.
Madam President?
Go ahead, Board Member Anderson.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board, and Superintendent Chavez. Just on upcoming dates and process, if we're not able to approve the budget tonight, we will have a meeting next week to further discuss and approve the budget, just to be clear, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
If we want more details or to see if we can get our other board members here or any number of things, we have the option to have another meeting next week, certainly, and that was always the provisional plan. And I don't know what would happen if we didn't do it by June 1, but, you know, we certainly want to.
Board Member Anderson, if I may add to that, bringing it to you just a little bit earlier gives us time to kind of do the worksheets, the actual budget roll-up into the PED documents. So obviously, we're hopeful, but I mean, if the board needs more or is not comfortable, it's understandable. But it just gives us a little bit more time there's a lot of worksheets that go into play.
Great, thank you.
On this last bullet, the budget is built by balancing revenues and expenditures, and just going back sort of, so basically we budget capital outlay based on what revenue we expect. And then just decide we're going to spend it all in that fiscal year.
Well, and just looking, President Noble, at the prior year expenditures and a lot of the recurring expenses that happen out of capital outlay, operational, utilities, those kinds of things that we have open encumbrances for.
Right. But a lot of our capital outlay plan is according to the facilities master plan. We have, it looks like $7 million more in the GO bond, and so those are particular projects that are vetted by the CRC.
Correct.
Okay, well, I guess I have a few questions sort of on process and some other things. And we'll just start there. How were SACs and school sites involved in developing the budget? And I assume there's a lot more specificity somewhere as to what is budgeted, whether it be in HB 33, as we heard some of the specifics about. But let's just start with how were school sites and, SACs in particular, our school advisory committees, involved in budget development?
Yeah, thank you, President Noble, members of the board. So when the sites receive their budget, and that's what we're working on now, with site budget worksheets, they work with their SACs with, if you want to call it discretionary funds, Title I, Family Income Index, ESSER. Really what's funded through the SEG is really static. It's really based off of FTEs. So outside of that funding source, and you can include some of the revenue sources that you mentioned, are developed with the principals and with their SACs to really take a look at it at their site level and find out what priorities are coming from the SACs to utilize that funding, that additional revenue.
Board President Noble.
Go ahead, Board Member Anderson.
Thank you, Board President Noble, members of the board, and Superintendent Chavez. I just have a follow-up to that. So I sat on the SAC of Gonzalez Community School for a couple of years, and I remember that, we had you had cells in the worksheet that you could edit and certain cells that you couldn't. And I've heard Board President Noble mention this priority, which I think was Board Member Price's priority of having a nurse, counselor, and a librarian in every school. So is that decision left up to the site? And then my kind of follow-up question is, should it be?
That is in collaboration with the site. Now, if we had nurses and counselors, applying, we would definitely be hiring them. But just like teachers, there are in short supply. So that is in collaboration with our student wellness department, site staff, and it's also based off of an enrollment, right? If we're looking at a low enrolled school, let's say we have a couple with 150 each, then they may share a counselor, they may share a nurse. So trying to get services in a strategic way, you could split a FTE between two specific sites or more.
And Board Member Anderson, if I may, on the budget worksheets for the sites, the only FTE that are ever locked are, so the CBA requires so many students to a teacher, like 22 to 1. So when we look at their enrollment, we go in and put how many teachers at the minimum they need to have. So we go in and put that, and if they want more and their budget allows for it, they can do that. But those are the only ones that are locked.
Thank you, I appreciate it. It was a great
course.
process. I really enjoyed being involved in my SACs. So this is my plug to the thousands who are watching to get involved in their school SACs.
Staying in that arena, so did we ask SACs, and whether through ESSER or through the budget process, and school sites for what they wanted? I mean, I hear that they're working on it now, but was there sort of preemptive work done?
Yeah, let me, thank you for the clarification, Board President Noble. So when we're talking, we'll start with ESSER and Family Income Index first. And we don't know that that was through SACs or parent organizations planning. I know one specifically at El Camino brought in their team to work on what the Family Income Index was going to be spent on because of the $420,000 they received. We have not worked through SACs yet because we are still working on site budgets as we're waiting for the approval, the pending approval before we issue out site budgets. So we're working with principals currently on their staffing first. And then once we have the staffing in place, then the remaining budget, as we mentioned through Title I, ESSER Family Income Index will be rolled out to them, and then they start that process with the SACs the following school year.
And also, President Noble, I will add that it's a work in progress throughout the year. I think that's one of the reasons that I made a decision to take the custodial supplies out of operational and move it to mill levy, because a lot of sites were having a hard time staying within their budget, maybe needing more. Some had enough budget, but other sites needed it, and so it's really something that happens throughout the year, making a note of it. I meet with a lot of the departments throughout the year, so it's pretty much just, staying up to date with what their departments are doing, maybe what they're forecasting and expecting to do in future. But as I mentioned, music has a large budget out of mill levy, so I met with them probably in March just to get their forecasted expenditures and what they're wanting to do with the program and within the sites. So it's really happened throughout the year as well.
Board President Noble.
Go ahead, Board Member Anderson.
Thank you, Board President Noble, members of the board, and Superintendent Chavez. I have another question sort of along that line. And maybe it's just a big question about how the budget is built. So is the budget built based on last year, or is it based on what each department and individuals need? Like, is there a wish list for teaching and learning? Is there we need X, Y, and Z for next year, or is it just we used this amount of money last year, so we'll use either this amount of money or this amount of money plus or minus a little bit?
Well, Board Member Anderson, there's a lot of components that go into building the budget, and it does include looking at prior year expenditures. It may look at new programs that are underway. It might include
Forecasting.
It just changes, but really, like I said, we look at expenditures, but we don't necessarily budget only based on expenditures, because COVID, when we were remote, who needed a lot of custodial supplies, so it's as needed, and if operational cannot fund it, we make sure that we look at other funding sources such as mill levy, such as special revenue to come in and absorb that, additional cost. But it's also looking at FTE, putting in those new mandates with the 7%, the new minimums, what the salary schedules are looking like, what the new increases to the employee and the employer benefits are going to be, and putting those into play in the benefit function. So it's really looking at past, looking at future, kind of where we are in present, and then also the new mandates and making sure that those are budgeted as well.
Got it. Board President Noble, thank you. Where am I going with this? When something like the Newcomer program comes in front of us as a board, and we say, we support this, we think this is really excellent, I'm not sure how to, and I don't want to micromanage the budget, but I'm not sure how to say, yes, we support that, yes, this is where our values are, through approving the budget. Does that make sense? Okay. I'm not, because and I don't expect you to roll this out in great detail, and I understand that it changes throughout the year. When I look at the ARPA and ESSER funds, I can see where those are going.
I'm just wondering how to be able to see where funds are going without micromanaging in the operating and operational budgets.
So, thank you immensely, Board Member Anderson, for that. And you, I think, just put into words some of what's happening for me as well, which is we have a financial framework here that is how I think how it works structurally for the district. And I really appreciate the points of, wanting not to micromanage. And I am fighting within myself the desire to ask for ridiculous levels of detail because I don't know what to ask for. But I am having trouble seeing what we do here and how things are evolving from one year to the next in this budget. I see it a little bit in the ESSER thing. I think, and I appreciate Mr. Martinez's point that it is so movable during the year. There is so much that needs to be changed. And this is the challenge of school finance because we have to do it PED's way. There are so many requirements. There are so many specially allocated funds. But, and I so appreciate bringing up counselors and librarians. And for a long time, the board was able to track those priorities through the budget, and I don't see that here, and I don't know. And I did some math, and I see about $125 million in staffing when I add up some of the different staffing and benefits lines. But if we're looking at somewhere, what we're looking at approving, and I'm seeing more and more how the bars and the contracts that we really have to do budget management as a board throughout the year, and that's how we understand some of these things. But, truly in how the budget is built, to your question, Board Member Anderson, I'm having trouble seeing how we are adjusting our program, some of what's changed from last year, we get that in the structural framework, is paying people more. Great, most important thing we can do. But as far as some of these other things that, we've tracked through the years, whether it be, and again, to Board Member Anderson's point, we were sort of moving on a full program includes a librarian, a school nurse, and a counselor. And, again, I can see the frame. I think the frame is probably fine, but I'm really struggling with seeing what we do, what's changed from one year to the next, how some of these things we've talked about through the years are being carried on or not. What's happening with professional development? Where's that going? Is the social, emotional stuff that we've talked about as board priorities anymore? I mean, I think a lot of this is integrated, but I don't know how to see it, and I guess would like to say, and I haven't gone back. Dr. Garcia had worked, I know, on giving more sort of the appropriate level of detail in terms of so that we can see, okay, this is staffing and this is teaching, and we have some of that here in the instructional versus support, but I'm struggling with understanding how this budget is evolving our district, aside from some of the big structural pieces of raises and our capital outlay is getting clear to me. So just to say that. And Superintendent, I'd love your thoughts on how we do that, how we can understand it better. So that's one piece. That's sort of a big question. I'll ask the smaller question, which might be easier first, which is, when we hear, Mr. Martinez, that you made the decision to move things out of SB 9 to HB 33, I'm sort of wondering how those decisions get made, how those allocations get made, and, you know, maybe it's a little bit of an esoteric question, but how the board can at least understand and provide our obligatory oversight for some of these things. And I assume that there are checks and balances in place for, you know, those decisions being made, and that there's some vetting being involved, but I'd love to understand how some of this works a little bit more.
President Noble, of course, and whenever those adjustments have been made between the funds, they do come in the form of a maintenance or a transfer bar to the board. You know, even talking about ARP and ESSER tonight, that's one fund. The district has over 1,000 funds. It really takes a village, as you know, to collaborate, and budget is not just April through June. Budget is all year long. Audit is all year long. There are components that, you know, even I was working with teaching and learning last week on the at-risk budget, divvying it up between the school sites, and based on how much school gets through at-risk is generated through the SEG. So there's a lot of components that take place between business services and other departments and sites throughout the schools of building adequate budgets based on the funding and what the membership is.
Would you like for me to take a stab at the bigger question?
I'd love for you to take a stab at any of it you want to. Yes, please.
Can I jump in before that?
Sure,
Because
yeah.
I think I'm sensing the same thing, that I really like the structure of this thing, but I'm not able to really visualize the impacts. And how do those things play out in the classroom and for kids, and what are we providing more of or less of compared to previous years?
All right. Thank you, Board President Noble, members of the board. First, I do want to say, if you feel uncomfortable with what we presented tonight, please, you know, take a step back. Do not approve it, because I don't want you to approve something that you're uncomfortable with. With that being said, you know, I think as you guys both mentioned, all three of you, you see the framework, but there's some missing pieces possibly to really help you clarify what you said, past, current, and maybe future. So bringing back another presentation at a special board meeting next week, next Thursday, may be in the best interest of the board. Plus, it also gives the other two board members an opportunity to be here, and then also get some feedback from them. So I think listening to you guys tonight, there are, took many notes, some adjustments we can make and come back with at a special board meeting next week to provide some clarity to really identify some of these issues that we're mentioning tonight. You know, how did we transition from professional development from one year to the next? Where are we at with full programming, as you mentioned, nurses, counselors, and librarians? What does it look like at school A and school B, previous year to current year? And so maybe we bring back another presentation for you next week. Again, I don't want you to approve something just for a deadline purpose. I want you to approve something that you're comfortable with.
Thank you so much, Board President Noble. Thank you, Board President Noble, members of the board, and Superintendent Chavez. I just to tack on to this discussion, because I feel like this is a really good discussion for everyone to have, and I really appreciate the information that we're getting both from Mr. Martinez and from you, Superintendent. I just want to note, you know, we are all elected to serve our constituents, and the other board members can speak for themselves, but the text messages and the emails that I get are you cutting music funding? Do our teachers get professional development? We need more books for the library. Those are the kinds of conversations that I have with the stakeholders, and I can always send them to you, certainly, but I want to make sure in approving the budget that I'm doing my, you know, elected duty to these folks to say, yes, like, and I think maybe I'm answering my own question, which is that staff knows where the money goes and they know how to spend it, and requests are not denied. But I think having a greater level of confidence in being able to answer those questions, no, we didn't cut music funding, no, we didn't, I think would be really helpful. And I really appreciate all the work that you've done here to show us. I mean, to know that the district is financially solvent is above all else the most important thing that we can do for the taxpayers in the community. And I think that's really important. And I think there's just this other, missing piece that is important for us as we hold our offices.
And may I thank you, Board President Noble, Board Member Anderson. And I think as we meet monthly, I meet with you bi-weekly, is maybe we meet more often and talk about specific sites that you represent, right? And when we talk about the budget at each site, maybe it's in greater detail. When I sit down with you, Mr. Martinez can join us and really take a look at each specific site that you represent and staffing needs, programmatic, opportunities at every site. So maybe that's something that we work towards, you and I and Mr. Martinez and the rest of the board members as we continue to meet.
That sounds great. I mean, I think a lot of this, like you said, changes and is information that we can get as we're meeting and as we're moving along. And I really appreciate that that information is available and I want to say that I do appreciate that this all changes and that there are 1,000 funds. I don't expect to see a, cash statement for each fund. They're just these big things that people ask about all the time that I think are really important to be able to address.
Yeah, and I think with new board members, getting to know your schools, right? As President Noble's been with the board for a number of years, she's more familiar with her schools than maybe you are.
Oh, yeah.
And so knowing what is happening within each one of your schools and having those meetings to really go into detail may help.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, and Board Member Anderson, if I may as well, there were no cuts to materials, supplies, instruction, anything like that to any of the school sites in this year's budget. There were no cuts. If anything, some may have seen additional increase in budget, but there were no cuts to the actual materials or, to what's going on in instruction.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear.
I feel it slightly necessary to inject a note of caution because we don't want board members, determining site budgets or getting too in the weeds and that sort of thing. It's always a balance, and I honestly think that this board in particular is very, very good about that. And I don't think that anybody will do that so much, but it is, just for you, Superintendent, you probably won't, I hope you won't always have this board. I hope you outlast many of us. And, it's one of those things that there's always a balance. And I appreciate the offer, and I guess I'd like to say I think I would like to take the superintendent up on the offer to meet next week and work on how we can see more the subject matter. This is a very good financial framework, and I'm comfortable enough with it, but I'm not yet comfortable that we can see the evolution, the goals, the values in sort of the subject matter of the budget. And I think that would be helpful, and I think it would feel good for the board. We hope we can get our other board members as well. That is very important, as well as, for being able to tell this story to the community that we represent, that all of us serve, as to what is happening with the Santa Fe Public Schools programs and how is this budget. I have great confidence that this budget is and will move things forward in terms of all of the great things that we've been doing. And I would like to understand how it connects more.
Board President Noble, I just have one additional comment, which is, and I know we're asking a lot of you to sort of turn this around in a week. One concern that I had is just that I would love for the public to be able to see what we're doing before the board meeting. got a text yesterday asking if the budget was in the, in the packet yet, because people, maybe not everyone, but people are concerned about the budget and about what's going on, and, to be able to get public comment before the meeting would be, even if it's just the day before or the night before, something that people can look at and give feedback on, that we can hear from our constituents would be great.
Board Member Anderson, and on that point, just for the public to know, the budgets, operational budgets, are actually on the PED website for every single school.
That's great.
So that's also a tool for them as well.
Perfect, thank you.
Any thoughts on what I proposed in terms of next week?
I agree.
I do, Board President Noble, members of the board, and Superintendent Chavez, I do really appreciate all the work that's been done here. And again, I feel, like Board President Noble, feel very confident in the financial framework. And I just want to make sure that the staff knows and that the superintendent knows that I do really appreciate the work that you've done to put this together.
Thank you. I want to echo that, and I know it's a lot of work, and I've wrestled with this a bunch, even just tonight, and I know it's been a heck of a year, and it's a lot of work, and the framework's strong, and I really appreciate that we're getting the cash balance up, and a lot of what's going on here. And this is, of course, one of our most important functions, and really would like to have some more flesh on the bone. Okay, anything else on this? I guess we'll come back next week. We'll hope that other board members can join us. You and I can maybe work together to figure out, I don't know if Dr. Gonzalez will still be traveling. Okay. I think we can just leave it. I think our intent is clear. We don't need to take action. Okay. Thank you. We will talk more about this. We'll push this to next week, talk more about it, and I am confident to say we will have a good budget that builds upon the strong financial framework we see tonight, with some more subject matter and meat on how it connects to the programming at the Santa Fe Public Schools. Okay, we'll move to board discussion and possible action. Anything anybody wants to put there? Okay, we'll move to advanced planning. We see our graduations there on 5/25. Santa Fe High School's graduation will be on 5/26. We will have hopefully a relatively brief board meeting. I'm thinking only one thing really on the agenda in addition to the matters of business. 5:30? Is that, yeah, just as a special board meeting. Would you all want to do it at 5? Does anybody feel strongly? All right, let's go for 5. On the 26th, then we will have Capitol High School's graduation on the 27th. And move into June after that. We will have a study session on June 9th that will be looking at our redistricting, the initial proposals there. Thank you, I'm sorry? 3 plans coming forward. Thank you, Superintendent, for that detail. Anything else on advanced planning? Okay, with that, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.